Hello from Ottawa. I'm Zaeira Yakova with MetroCity Property Group, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with my good friend.
Adada from Kelly Santini Real Estate Lawyer.
Today we wanted to talk about a new regulation that has come into place from the government that will affect you as a buyer or potentially even a seller. So we wanted to talk today about the Prohibition on Purchase of Residential Property by Non-Canadians Act. So Sarah, what is this act about?
So this act is to help Canadians afford homes in Canada.
Okay.
It's effective for a period of 2 years from January 1st, 2023, and it bans foreign buyers from purchasing residential property in Canada. And today we're going to go over the details for the definitions and the exceptions to this act that can help current Canadians understand and potential foreign buyers that want to invest in our country.
Wonderful. So we wanted to make this video and answer some of the frequently asked questions because I have noticed recently buyers that I'm speaking to that do fall into this category that will not be able to buy. So it's very important that these conversations are being had with your professionals that you're working with through your buyer journey before you start spending time to look for properties. So the first question I had was, when does it start? And you answered that it starts January 1st, 2023. Now, who does the Prohibition on Purchase of Residential Property by Non-Canadians Act apply to?
It applies to people who are not Canadians, permanent residents, or people that are not registered under the Indian Act. More importantly, it also doesn't apply to, it applies to corporations based in Canada that are privately held by non-Canadians or entity formed under Canadian laws, but that are controlled by a majority of non-Canadians.
Okay, and how is a residential property defined in this act? For example, is it a duplex? Could it be land? Could it be a multi-unit residential building? So what properties are they saying we cannot buy if we are not one of those three things?
So vacant lands do apply, surprisingly.
Okay.
But more importantly, it is intended to residential property that are up to 3 dwelling units. So a single family home, a duplex, and a triplex. But as you mentioned, it would not apply to a commercial building with multiple units.
Okay, so that's really good to know. So if you do want to buy a fourplex, for example, you would not be subject to this act.
Exactly. As a foreign buyer, you are eligible to purchase a fourplex.
Perfect. The next question is, what kinds of purchases does this act apply to? For example, if I'm going to be a partner in the purchase with you and I'm a non-resident in this act, I'm not a Canadian citizen, I'm not a permanent resident, would that affect me if we were going to be partners? So what types of purchases are we talking about here?
Exactly like you said. If we were a partnership, we could not purchase the property because we are partners together. It would appear to the Canadian government as though I am helping a foreign buyer to purchase a property in Canada, knowing that there is a ban currently for a period of 2 years until January 1st, 2025. Anyone who tries to help non-Canadians purchase a property through any means would be held liable and would be subject to a fine of $10,000.
Good. That was going to be one of my questions: is what happens if this isn't followed through? So, what I wanted to also ask you, which is the situation that I ran into with a buyer. They are a temporary resident. One of them is a student, and the spouse is working. And it did say in the vague information that is out there that temporary residents that are a student or working are exempt, which means they could buy. But when we started to dig a little bit deeper, it's more complicated than that. So I really wanted to clarify that piece is, what groups of people does this act not apply to? And it's temporary residents that are studying. So let's start with that one. So if you are studying as a temporary resident, there is some, there's a few restrictions.
Yes, there are.
Right?
Exactly as you mentioned. So, for example, the potential client that you would have had who's a student with a temporary resident permit, they would have to physically been present in Canada for a minimum of 244 days out of the last 5 calendar years in which the purchase was made. and they should not have previously purchased a property while the prohibition is in effect, and the purchase price of the property cannot exceed $500,000.
So, just sorry to interrupt
Yes.
you, just to clarify. So, if this individual bought the property December 2022,
Yes.
then they would still be allowed to close on that property because they bought it
Exactly.
before January 1st.
Exactly.
That's very good to
So
know.
yeah, in
Okay.
general, foreign buyers, if they sign an agreement of purchase and sale, especially, with builders, prior to January 1st, 2023, they can still go ahead with their purchase, because it was signed before then. And more
Even if it
importantly,
was a conditional offer, but it was going to become firm after January 1st, how is that viewed?
the agreement of purchase and sale was still signed before January 1st,
Okay.
2023. So we go based on that date, not on the
Okay.
date that the deal became firm.
Good
So
to know.
luckily enough for those foreign buyers, they can still go ahead.
Okay, good
But
to
just
know.
to mention one more thing about temporary residents with a study permit, they must also have filed income taxes for each of the 5 taxation years preceding the date of purchase. And it's the same idea with temporary residents with a work permit. They, of course, must hold a valid work permit. They must not have previously purchased a property while the prohibition was in effect. And of course, they must have filed income taxes, and they must be in Canada for a minimum number of days in each calendar year prior to the purchases made.
So that's a big
It is.
5 taxation years, 244 days. So that takes away a big group of prospective foreign buyers. As you come here, you're not a permanent resident yet, you're a temporary worker or student, and you've been here for 4 years or 3 years, and you may have the down payment and you may have great credit.
Mhm.
So this could affect a big group of buyers then.
Absolutely. There
from-
is going to be a lot of restrictions on who can purchase. It's going to be a lot more difficult. And at that point, I actually now recommend people to consult with an immigration lawyer to make sure that they have the right paperwork in order, that they have filed whatever they have to file to know that they are qualified under those exceptions before they meet with a mortgage broker or with a real estate agent, so that they can actually see what they can purchase. So typically the first
very
step,
good to know.
exactly, typically the
Typically.
first step is, speak to your mortgage broker, see what you can afford, and then speak to your real estate agent to go from there. And then I come into the equation. But I guess now immigration lawyers are going to be the first door to knock on.
If you're in that. And it's the good news is, this information is circulated through us, and when we do meet with clients or prospective buyers, first-time home buyers, we've added this now as a, qualification question, to make sure that if they haven't spoken to an immigration lawyer, that we are not, starting a process that's going to end up stopping very far into it because a step was missed in the very beginning. So that's very, very good advice, Sarah. And just, to keep in mind, even though this will affect some buyers, this is just one of the strategies that the federal, provincial and municipal governments are employing to help mitigate this lack of housing problem that our city and our country is really facing. So this is just one of them, and it's this act, just to kind of mitigate that side of things. So if you're a foreign buyer, temporary resident, student, or a working temporary resident, don't just think, well, I qualify. You have to make sure that you meet those criteria of being in the country for 244 days and having filed your taxes. But then again, if you don't have a good immigration lawyer to contact, we have wonderful contacts for you in the community, so we can also sort of help you get answers to those questions. Now, the other question we had is, what if you're a refugee? Because refugees are exempt, but under what pretense?
So, under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, if their claim of being a refugee is found legible, and they do get a temporary resident status out of that immigration status, then they can be given that exception to purchase a property. But again, you have to have your papers in order, so that way you can have confidence that when you do contact your mortgage broker and real estate agent, you know that the purchase can actually take place.
Okay.
Yeah, and one thing I did want to mention, I know we may get to that, is that if you do end up buying the property and then it is later found out that you were not eligible to purchase it, then of course the Canadian government will sell it forcefully, and you will only get back the purchase price of the property, not whatever else you may have paid for it. Let's say closing cost, or other fees with your mortgage broker.
Okay. Now, we talked about buying a property as a business partner if I'm a non-resident, and you are, and we, form a business partnership to purchase a property. But there is an exception where we are spouses or common law partners, where one is non-Canadian. There is an exception for that, right?
Exactly.
So what is that exception for that one?
So, especially if, let's say, you are divorcing your Canadian spouse or being separated from them, or if the property is actually being gifted to you through estate, then you are still eligible to acquire that property. And if you are acquiring a property today with your Canadian spouse or common law partner, you can go ahead with the purchase. But of course, you should always have your documents in order, because just as when people apply for spousal sponsorship, you must have your documentation in order to ensure that you have the qualification to go ahead.
Wonderful. So that's just kind of a few of the main questions that we wanted to go over today. There's a lot more to it in terms of third parties being involved and what type of documentation you will need to prove that you are qualified to make that purchase, which is all on my website at zaeirayakova.com. You can visit the link below to see the entire list and the link to the act from the government. But there's one last thing that I did want to ask Sarah. We talked about what stage it should be verified that you're qualified. So your immigration lawyer says you're good to go, purchase the property. Now, if the real estate agent asks and the buyer says yes to me, I'm not in a position to be asking for proof of this documentation because it's their private information that doesn't, I wouldn't want to ask people for their permits and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So would you, as their real estate lawyer, be the one finally confirming that they're qualified?
Yes, exactly.
At that stage?
Precisely. I would be getting in touch with your immigration lawyer to make sure that I do have the right documentation on file, just in case, the Canadian Revenue Agency or the Canadian government come back to me to confirm why we went ahead with the purchase and that you were qualified and that I did ask the right questions. Then,
which you do.
Exactly.
That's why Sarah Adada at Kelly Santini is
Thank you.
Thorough and efficient, and it really, working with the right professionals, saves you from a lot of headaches in the future and mitigates all that risk for you.
Absolutely, and this is exactly what we're here for. So we will be asking you the right questions. We will be asking from you the right documentation that we need, as hectic as it may be, to make sure that you are protected at the end of the day.
Perfect. And there is a fine.
Yes, there
is a fine. If this law is, if it is investigated and it is found that there was wrongdoing and the law was violated, or the act was violated, and anybody knowingly helps, underline that word.
Exactly.
If you knowingly help a situation or you don't do your due diligence, we have fiduciary duty in our industries as professionals. Mm-hmm. It is our job to ask the right questions, to protect you, and to follow the law. And what happens, Sarah, if that is not done?
So other than the consequences as a real estate agent for not respecting your fiduciary duties, you would be subject to a $10,000 fine. It is the same idea with a mortgage agent as well as a lawyer. The three of us have fiduciary duties to work in the best interest of our clients, but more importantly, abide by the laws and the regulations that surround our profession.
Yes.
So we must, of course, ask the right questions because we are all aware of the act. We must ask our clients for the right documentation to make sure that they are qualified to go ahead with the purchase. Mm-hmm. And if we knowingly or on purpose don't ask the right questions just to go ahead with the file, then that's a red flag from a professional that you should be aware of. But more importantly, as professionals, we are now in the know that there is going to be a $10,000 fine, and that as professionals, we're going to be red flagged.
Yes, and it's a part of our job to deliver and keep enhancing the way we deliver service to our clients, which includes doing research and staying up to date with regulatory changes and being able to share that with our clients so that they are making informed decisions in their purchase or sale of their home. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure discussing this topic with all of you.
Yes, and we're going to be making more content to go through all the different strategies that are happening at the federal, provincial, and municipal level to help this housing crisis in Canada with the shortage. And there's so many great initiatives that have been put in place that are sort of being rolled out. And we'll make videos to keep you informed. If there's anything that you'd like us to make a video about, please leave a comment below or reach out to us. And I want to give a shout out to CMHC, the Canadian Housing Mortgage Corporation, that does an incredible job at collecting data, presenting it, and making it available to the public to keep us informed with all these changes that are happening. So to all the people working at CMHC, thank you and keep up the great work. I'm Zaeira Yakova with MetroCity Property Group.
I'm Adada with Kelly Santini.
And we'll see you next time.